Good morning, everyone. My name is Elena Maizel, and I am the Israel Chair of the Jewish Leadership Conference and manage most of Tikva's educational work in Israel. I live and work in Jerusalem now, but grew up here in New York. I was privileged to have grandparents who fought for Israeli independence, and my family appreciated very deeply the miracle of the reborn Jewish state. Israel was a very important piece of my identity and family history, and we all hope to be able to contribute to Israeli security, Israeli prosperity, and the Jewish people. Growing up, one of the writers who helped me translate that ambition to reality, grow passion into principle, was our next speaker, Caroline Glick. Everyone here knows of her incredible range, writing on Israeli security and politics, American politics, Jewish affairs. She addresses it all with intelligence, with depth, and a lot of passion. I often agree with her analysis, but I always learn from it. Caroline Glick's conservative perspective has influenced and broadened discourse in Jerusalem, in Washington, and in the Jewish world. And she's about to do the same for us here at the Conference on Jews and Conservatism. So please give a very warm welcome to Jerusalem Post columnist, author, editor, analyst, Caroline Glick.
Thank you, Ilana. Thank you all. I want to make a special thank you to my friend, a great Jewish leader, the greatest, I think, that I know of here in America, which is Roger Hertog. You know, he took me out to breakfast this morning right after I landed, and as always, I insulted him to his face, right? Just, you know, Jew to Jew. But I like to compliment him and praise him when you're most vulnerable and you can't interrupt me. We owe you an enormous amount for the extraordinary work you've done as a philanthropist, as a visionary of how to preserve, conserve, and protect the Jewish people in Israel, the United States, and throughout the world. And one of the things that most distinguishes you, I think, is that you're not simply somebody that I go to ask for money, which I'm always happy to do. It's, you're a friend, and you care so much about the people that you believe in. And I don't have to be decisive when I talk to you because we're both committed to solving problems, the same problems, and you're just a wonderful, dear person and friend and a great leader. So thank you. Another great leader and teacher of mine is the late Professor Ben-Zion Netanyahu. And when I heard about the massacre yesterday in Pittsburgh, the unspeakable massacre that we still must speak about, I was reminded of an admonition that he told me repeatedly throughout our years of friendship, which is that the one distinguishing factor about anti-Semitism that distinguishes it from every other form of bigotry and racism is that it is inherently annihilationist. Anti-Semites aren't engaged in simple discrimination against Jews, simple bigotry against Jews. The ultimate ulterior motive of all anti-Semitism is to wipe the Jewish people off the face of the planet. This has been true since the age of the pharaohs, and it's true today as well. One of the greatest challenges, and I dare say failings, unfortunately, of the Jewish community here is its weakness in identifying and then countering anti-Semitism. We saw this, unfortunately, already today in the aftermath of yesterday's massacre. We have people like Franklin Foer and other leading American Jewish voices. Franklin Foer wrote a piece in the Atlantic Monthly that was just published, I think, today, saying that the take-home lesson from the massacre is that American Jews should shun American Jews who support President Trump. So intent on not seeing the enemies and threats facing this community, we have leading Jews in this community who would rather use the tragedy of a massacre, the greatest crime against the Jewish people in the history of the United States, carried out on American soil by an American, and use it as a means to gain political points against ideological rivals. The main casualty of this sort of behavior are the American Jews themselves. And people who are harmed by this is the community here in America. The weakness of this community that unfortunately keeps expanding owes, as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said last week in his speech before the General Assembly of the Jewish Federations of North America, is an erosion of Jewish identity. You cannot defend against threats to your existence if you don't know who you are, which is why programs like the ones that the Tikva Foundation are undertaking here in the United States are so extraordinarily important. Because you need young leadership, you need at least a cadre of young Jews here who understand who they are and what it means to be Jewish. Otherwise, you're lost. I would say that there are 4 major threats, anti-Semitic threats, in the United States facing American Jews. 3 of them at least have so far been identified, and one of them, for various reasons which I'm going to discuss through as the focus of my remarks today, is one that has not been properly identified and certainly hasn't been properly countered. The 3 forms of anti-Semitism that are largely recognized are Nazi anti-Semitism of the type we saw massacring grandparents and great-grandparents at the Tree of Life Synagogue yesterday in Pittsburgh. American Jews don't generally have a problem identifying white supremacist Nazis as their enemies. How they counter it varies from year to year, but generally speaking, there is a consensus among the American Jewish community that white supremacist Nazis are our enemies. The second threat, also largely identified, although not consensually, are jihadists as a major threat of anti-Semitism facing this community. The third major threat of anti-Semitism facing this community are the likes of Louis Farrakhan and his followers among the Nation of Islam and black nationalists influenced by Islamist anti-Semitism. We got a reminder from Farrakhan of just how lethal he is a week ago when he compared us to termites. The fourth form of anti-Semitism that faces this community, and I dare say affects the largest number of American Jews directly, is anti-Zionism. And one of the greatest tragedies of our times is that it is not widely understood just how clearly anti-Semitic anti-Zionism is, and why this, above all else, must be recognized if this community is to survive and thrive and retain its power and ability to speak in its own voice. So I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about what anti-Zionism is and why it is inherently and completely anti-Semitic. Anti-Zionism says that the largest Jewish community in the world must be destroyed, has no right to exist. This is inherently anti-Semitic. It also says that Jews who support the continued existence of the largest Jewish community in the world, that is the State of Israel, should be silenced, should be ostracized, should be disenfranchised, and should be disempowered. Why is it that there's any question that this is anti-Semitism? Because it comes with an attitude. It says we're not anti-Semites, we're simply critiquing Israel. This is an issue of freedom of speech. This is political speech and therefore protected. We know that the shock troops of anti-Zionism operate in this country specifically under the banner of BDS, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions against Israel. Against Israel, therefore, it's not against the American Jewish community. So let's just talk a second about what the methods of operation of the BDS movement are, okay? And then we can think about who they are directed against. BDS movement ostracizes Jews who support Israel. Think of Professor Andrew Pessin from University of Connecticut, who posted a post on his Facebook page during Operation Protective Edge in 2014 criticizing Hamas for its acts of illegal warfare against the people of Israel in the form of missile attacks indiscriminately sent over the border into Israel to attack and terrorize over 6 million Jews who live within the range of Gaza's missiles. For his post, he was ostracized and subjected to continuous withering attacks by the Students for Justice in Palestine on the campus of University of Connecticut, and ultimately was forced out of his position. That is, the people who were ostracizing him for opposing a terrorist army in an illegal terrorist regime that controls the proto-state Palestine in Gaza. He was forced out of his position, effectively fired. Second mode of operation of the BDS movement is boycott. Last spring, over 50 student organizations at New York University, right here in Manhattan, signed a pledge to participate in BDS, and they were going to do this by doing what? Ostracizing 2 pro-Israel clubs on campus. Ostracizing Jewish students who had the nerve to join pro-Israel organizations on campus, and then a half dozen Jewish organizations operating here in this city as well. Boycotting Jews on campus. Another one, picketing. We had the example, for instance, at Vassar College, where a leftist progressive Jewish professor who was teaching water conservation studies and preparing her class to go to Israel for a class trip to see what Israel has done in the science of desalination of water, found her classroom picketed by anti-Zionist students saying, shame on you, and making her students cross a picket line to enter their class and study. Picketing. Silencing, disenfranchising. We had the example at University of California at Los Angeles, I think the year before last, where student government representatives who were Jewish, candidates for office in the Student Council of the University of California at Los Angeles were voted down because they were Jews, and they therefore couldn't actually be neutral or objective in votes regarding Israel because they were, as Jews, pro-Israel. And you, of course, had the most recent example of discrimination, academic discrimination that made the news at University of Michigan, where not one but 2 students were told by their professors when they asked for recommendations to study abroad in Israel that those recommendations would not be forthcoming, not because the students weren't worthy of the recognition, but because the professors who were asked for the recommendations refused to recommend anybody to study in Israel. So we're told that the BDS movement is anti-Israel, but let's just look at what I've outlined here, and this is all examples that I came up with, frankly, while I was flying here last night from Israel. That is, these are things that happen every day. Who are the primary victims here? Is it Israel? No, it's you. It's the American Jewish community. American Jews are the ones that are targeted by BDS. This is an anti-Semitic movement that is targeting American Jews. First and foremost, Israel is used as a vehicle to legitimize the demonization, the disenfranchisement, the discrimination, the boycott, the ostracism of American Jews in America. Israel is a vehicle. We are not the primary victim. We are not the primary target. And we know what the impact of this has been. How many American Jewish students who come to university campuses are interested in participating in pro-Israel activities? How many are not because they don't feel like dealing with this? How many of us know American Jews who went through the university system and changed what they might have written in their papers because they didn't want to get a bad grade? I know. Do you know? Have you heard those stories? We've all heard those stories because it happens every single day to our nieces and our nephews and our children and our grandchildren and our friends. So again, who is being targeted here? American Jews. And where is it going? American Jews are harmed. Who's advanced? Who's advanced? Who gets forward because of the BDS movement? Oh, let's just think of a couple people. Oh, there's Linda Sarsour. She's very dangerous. She keeps rising. She goes from strength to strength. She's got an honorary degree at CUNY. She's the head of the Women's March. Your senator here in New York, Kirsten Gillibrand, has her introduce her at rallies in Washington, D.C. to show her bona fides as a feminist. There you go. There you go. She's very powerful. She's very powerful. And she's an out-and-out Jew hater. Farrakhan, Jews are termites. I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm an anti-termite, he says, and doesn't get thrown off Twitter. And who did he sit next to at Aretha Franklin's funeral? A former president of the United States of America. This is a man who calls our religion a gutter religion, and he gets a place of honor at a national event. We have to understand that people are being advanced at our expense. Jews are being targeted and enabling, through their targeting, the advancements of people who want to throw them out of public life in this country. And they're meeting with success. Now, why is this working? How is it possible that a movement, that a campaign to disenfranchise American Jews as Jews is moving forward? How is it advancing? I'm sorry. It's because of the failure of the Jewish leadership here in this country. You don't want to choose between an ideological identity and your rights as Jews. Because that's what it's come down to, right? Because if you have voices like Linda Sarsour and, what's her name, Ocasio-Cortez, and, you know, the Middle East genius, right? Who are moving forward in the Democratic Party. And you have Jewish leaders in Congress and out of Congress, in the Senate and out of the Senate, who aren't willing to stand up and say, we will not have this. We will not have this in our party. Guess what? They will have it in their party. If you have Jewish voters who aren't willing to say, wait a minute, where are the people standing up for our right to speak as Jews about anything we want? Because we're Americans. If you don't have those people standing up and saying, excuse us, our votes are not unqualified, then you will have your votes ignored, taken for granted, and your voices shut out of the debate in your party. We saw yesterday what it means when you don't stand up for yourself, when you don't take action to defend yourself. Somebody in there had a gun, and he was the bad guy. And we don't ask, why don't the good guys have guns? We don't ask the hard questions. We don't ask the hard questions because we don't want to come to the hard answers. And the hard answers tell us that Benzion Netanyahu was right. His admonition to me for all of those years was absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. This isn't about us. It's not about who supports Trump and who opposes Trump. You know, many years ago, the very beginning of the Palestinian terror war, I had the honor of interviewing the late Elie Wiesel. It's actually 2 years, and it was in 2002. It was one of the first articles I wrote for the Jerusalem Post. And I asked him, you know, we saw really for the first time this incredible rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses, right? The likes of which we really just hadn't experienced here in America. I met him in Jerusalem, and I said to him, what do you say to the young Jews in the United States who are facing anti-Semitism for the first time? How do you talk to them? They don't know what they're dealing with. They've never seen this before. Their parents didn't experience it. How do you shield them? How do you strengthen them? How do you empower them? And Elie Wiesel said to me, we mustn't let the anti-Semites define us. We mustn't let the haters define us. The Jewish people were the first nation on earth to actively define ourselves. We are the children of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob. And we have to be able to remember who we are. We have to be able to stand up and say, we know who we are. You're not going to tell us who we are. You cannot define us by your hatred. You define yourselves by your hatred. We need to have that voice heard here in the United States. In Israel, we have many people who say that. Here in the United States, we're not hearing it enough. Who are the Jews? We are the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's who we are, and don't mess with us. And let's tell me who you are. You are the haters of the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's who you are. It is the great test of our times here in the United States to develop the means as American Jews here, your test, to know who you are, to know why it's important and imperative to defend, and then to go out and defend it, and preserve it, and protect it into the next generation. We face enormous stakes. Now isn't the time for petty rivalry. Now is the time to rise above that rivalry and face enemies, real enemies. Franklin Foer isn't the enemy. He's just a petty person. The enemies are the people who want to annihilate the Jews, and they are growing stronger in the United States. And the key to fighting them and defeating them is first and foremost to be able to identify them and then understand who they are, what they stand for, and why they must be defeated. So again, 4 types of major anti-Semitism that all threaten the very existence of the Jewish people here in the United States. They are the anti-Semites who have the Nazi variety, of the jihadist variety, of the Nation of Islam variety, and yes, of the anti-Zionism variety. And we have to recognize all of them and counter all of them with the force of our convictions and understanding of who we are. So I leave you with this challenge. I know with leaders like Roger and with all of you here that we can and we must meet and rise to this challenge and surpass it and move on to the next one, like we always do as Jews. And there'll be more challenges in the future, but let's get through this one today. Thank you very much.